Now we move on to making your home a more effective shelter. Remember, now we're talking about worst case scenarios, right? So, in or after a worst case happening, the most obvious shelter, beyond dressing for your situation, that is going to be your home. Because all of your supplies are there, your comforts are there, everything that you've prepared is probably there. It's also a great place that's a primary base for people. Your family knows where to find you. It's a good central meeting place. If it's safe to be there, it makes complete sense. So the first thing to consider is it safe, right? Or can it be made safe? After some disasters, your home may not be safe anymore. Earthquakes and tornadoes can leave foundation, structural issues with your home, and you can't be there any longer. Floods in lower areas, it can contaminate the house with all sorts of disease-containing organisms. Um, in this case, no matter how much you've invested in staying put, you're going to have to leave. You won't have a choice. So let's just say we're in a situation where we can at least temporarily stay in our house. So before and during. Well, we want to secure and lock all the windows and doors. Go to a safe interior space, or the highest and lowest as appropriate, depending on the circumstance and type of disaster. And there are some scenario-based disasters later in the book where I go into where you want to be in what conditions. Now, if time permits, secure loose and dangerous items, chemicals, glass, wall-mounted items. Seal and block airflow, windows and doorways, as appropriate depending on the type of event, of course. Use mattresses and blankets as padding. Use spare doors to create structure if necessary. And of course, gather your kits. Have things nearby you, or strategically placed throughout the structure. After, when this is passed, we want to inspect our area and look for damage. Look for large cracks in the foundation, sloping floors. We want to make sure the walls and roof lines are how they're supposed to be. We're not leaking water everywhere. Verify there aren't electrical and fire dangers. There aren't gas leaks. Verify, now, let's take, for example, a situation where you might be returning to your home to shelter there after a disaster. Make sure there aren't any animals or rodents in the place. Check for general sanitation. You shouldn't have mold in or on the walls. There shouldn't be sewage backing up in the basement, right? So use caution when cleaning up these things too. Wear PPE. Make sure you have gloves. Make sure you have masks. Know the materials you're cleaning up. In household spills, things can mix together and make you very sick. Watch for any sorts of unstable objects, right? Keep a good eye out and make sure that things aren't going to fall. And then, of course, if it's dark, just make sure you have things lit until you're able to really secure your perimeter. Clean and repair everything possible, and then sanitize the house. Dispose of the trash, dead animals, unsafe items, etc. And there's a lot more on this later on in the book in the protection and the have a plan sections. All right, some things that are really handy to have. Pretty basic, pretty general. Probably nothing super revelatory here. Have a sanitation kit, sanitation items. Make sure you have lots of backup. A good first aid kit. And while we're talking about being in a house, this is different than a first aid kit you might have in a get home bag or a get out bag. This is a more comprehensive home-based first aid kit. A fire extinguisher, an all-type fire extinguisher. Heavy debris bags, spare fuel if necessary. For general rebuilding and temporary sheltering, having some basic construction tools and materials on hand might be nice too. Plywood, any kind of dimensional lumber you can use for bracing or framing. Some pressure-treated lumber, large-sized tarps, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, duct tape, spare insulation, maybe, maybe not, Screws and nails. Drywall screws are a really good all-around sort of thing to have. Any kind of that, like a foaming gap type sealer, hand tools, saws, etc. Afterwards, you want to be strategic with your climate, right? We've talked about this several times now. You want to conserve the heat or the cold. So insulate yourself and surroundings. Compartmentalize where you are. So unused areas should be blocked off. Close the doors and insulate. Insulate the doors by hanging a blanket or throwing a spare mattress up against it. Blanket off areas in large rooms. Use rugs to insulate floors if you have hardwood floors or tile, for example. Block solar heating in windows by using maybe Mylar blankets or car windshield reflectors. There's all sorts of things you can use, even just hanging something over the window. This will help keep the heat or the cool in or out. Cool or heat through convection. So control your airflow as much as possible. Sometimes you won't want to completely compartmentalize everything. Sometimes you'll want a breeze to flow through. Shelter in the warmest or coolest parts if possible. Use tarps and other covers to block sunlight outside. So not just hanging something inside, but I can actually create a sunshade outside as well. It's going to go a long ways toward dropping the temperature. Keep the air dry as much as possible, especially in the cold. You can use candles or regulate airflow to keep the air dry. Keep cold air from coming down places like the fireplace flue, for example. Seal off ducting that creates drafts. And adjust sleeping arrangements depending on the season as well. So you want to use convection to your advantage. So the things you do now to prepare in the present really are going to pay dividends in the future. We want to work these things out, just like that above exercise when you're checking out the clothing you have and testing your layers. You're going to want to walk through your house and figure this out. Make a list. Talk to your family members about it if they're going to be involved in this. Okay, let's talk about outdoor shelters. So sometimes you won't be able to stay at home. Sometimes you won't necessarily be able to evacuate in a vehicle. You may find yourself sheltering outdoors, either alone or with others. Well, the fact is there are a ton of portable shelter options. Just about anything you can possibly imagine. There's military surplus stuff, there's camping gear. You probably have a ton of it already in your house. There's pre-made shelters. Tents are probably the easiest and best thing for this, and there's all sorts of them as well. Sleeping bags and bivy bags. Hammocks are a nice consideration. They're very light, very portable, keeps you off the ground. Now, there are some insulation considerations with hammocks, but they can be easily overcome with very simple items. Lightweight emergency type things like space blankets or emergency tarps, drum liners, etc. Those can be kept just about anywhere as well. So later in the book here, in the Consider Gear section, I talk about all this stuff much more in depth and being part of the forests, which is kind of an acronym that every kit is based on in the book. So outdoor shelters, we have tarp shelters, right? Let's just say, for example, we're on the go, we're trying to get home, we're in a situation where we don't have a lot. Tarp shelter is one of the easiest things to do. I'm not going to go too in-depth into this. There's millions of videos on this type of thing, but there's the A-frame, which is extremely simple. There's an A-frame with a floor, which is tighter and closer to the ground, good in storm conditions. There's the lean-to, which is really just for keeping kind of general things off the top of you, but allowing airflow through. This really isn't too good for keeping warm, but in warm conditions is great for keeping cool and slightly sheltered as well. The wedge, another great storm shelter, very quick and easy to put up. Adirondack, a little bit like a lean-to, except gives you some side coverage from the wind. You can also allow for the front to slightly hang over the ridge line, and that could be brought out to create a little bit of a better rain shelter. This is a Holden tent. It has many different names. Again, extremely simple to construct. You see how to fold the tarp and how to stake it out on the back. Okay, well, how about if I don't have any of this stuff and I'm caught out? I may have a little bit of EDC items, but not a whole lot. So what do I do? If you're caught out there with just the clothes on your back, the thing to consider, of course, is thermal regulation, right? We want to conserve our calories and our water and maintain our core temperature. So quick and dirty shelters like these might be able to help you if you have nothing whatsoever, no resources, no tools. In hot weather, dig a trench under a stalled vehicle. Dig into the side of a hill or a dune. Use natural formations, a great way to save calories for shade and shelter. Caves, rock outcrops, small canyons. The desert gets cold at night. Without fire, use grasses to insulate a trench or a shelter. Use a rock wall to radiate heat. Use hot rocks to radiate heat. In winter and in cold weather, you can dig a snow cave. Dig into the side of a snowy hill. Use a trench method to stay out of the wind. Use natural formations such as evergreen trees, rock outcrops, and caves. And then, of course, use natural materials copiously for insulation to keep you off the ground and possibly even in your clothing. Fire will probably be pretty difficult with no kit and nothing, in your pockets to help that. You can keep tinder on the go dry by carrying it in your pockets or under your clothing. If you're good with a bow drill and primitive skills, which we talk about a little bit later in the book here, those components can be kept dry the same way, right under your clothing, or between layers, let's say. Snow trench and cave shelters will get you under the snow and below the wind level to help combat convection. Since snow is made up largely of air, it acts as a decent insulator. Areas of compacted snow can be cut into blocks for structure. You can we all did it when we were kids, right? We made snow shelters and forts and things. Can totally be done. You dig a trench along the side, and it allows the cold air to settle down in there a little bit more while you're breathing. Here's another tip I threw in here. If you're caught without any tools, your bootlaces can be great for making makeshift snares to catch food, build a bow drill for starting fires, maybe even weapons like a small bow or a sling. If you replace your laces with paracord, it's even better because you can use the inside strands of the paracord and you can keep the outer covering to tie up your boots. So here's some natural shelters that require little tools and preparation and can be made really with, if you had cordage with you, but with all natural cordage as well. Again, things like the lean-to. An elevated bed or a swamp bed to get you up off the ground. You can also build a fire up on top of this. If you're in a swampy area with lots of wet soil or in an area where there's a lot of clay type soil, you can actually build a little pad on top of some flat rocks or even just on the clay, make yourself a small fire. Keep bugs away, help keep the warmth, all the while you're up and dry. Debris shelters are unlimited in design. This is a little bit like the wedge tarp. Very easy to build. Cover it with debris depending on your surroundings. If you're in the western coastal woodlands, you aren't going to have any leaves to pile on top. You're going to have to cover it with boughs and dirt. In the eastern woodlands, there's leaves everywhere, provided they aren't rotten. You can make a debris bed. This is quick and dirty. It works great. Here's some knots for making shelters. I won't go into this too much, but I threw basically what I thought were the most important knots to know, very basic ones, and really the ones I use. And quite frankly, I don't find myself using any more than these 6. Okay, on to other types of sheltering. So what about sheltering in a vehicle? It can be extremely effective. I mean, it's a pre-made shelter, just like a house, just like a tent. It doesn't require you to really do anything. Now, there's times when we don't want to shelter inside of a vehicle, in tornado, for example, or in rising floodwaters. If there's a, I don't know, chemical or radioactive, other airborne type of disaster, it's not as airtight. If that's all you have, then I guess you do what you can. So some considerations when sheltering in a vehicle and some actions to take. Locate the vehicle in the safest place possible for the conditions. Closing the windows and the vents, possibly sealing with duct tape. Driving away from any visible signs of gas or dust clouds or debris fallout. You want to stay in your vehicle as much as possible. Take caution against running the engine or burning for heat, like an alcohol stove or a candle, for example. Yes, it can be done, absolutely. But take care. And then, of course, if you're driving, drive extremely defensively. Remember always, you have emergency alert radio systems out there. Follow emergency instructions. Trust your instincts and knowledge. So we talk about having a get home bag a little later on, and this is something that should be in the vehicle. So given that, you have some resources in there already. You want things like maybe a sleeping bag or a blanket. Even something small like a little wool or polar fleece blanket goes a long ways toward keeping you warm in there. Maybe a tiny sleeping bag. Having some seasonal clothing in there extra. It could vary, right? Depending on where you live. You might have some heavier rain gear, a stocking hat, spare gloves, lightweight t-shirts, undergarments that are seasonally relevant, small towels or microfiber towels. Some tools, a small shovel, some signaling items, maybe a pry bar. You probably have one attached to your lug wrench. A small folding saw, perhaps. This really just all depends on the areas you travel to and from on the way to work or wherever you go, and back home, right? These components are going to change a lot. We talk about this later in the book in the Get Home Bags section. And again, I can't stress it enough. Heat and cool thermal regulation. It's not always going to be possible to run the car engine to keep you warm or keep you cool. So, there's some low-tech things you can use, right? You can use a candle. We talked about it. Inside of a mason jar helps out and increases the level of safety a little bit as well. To cool you down, especially at night, you want to have those doors open. The windows open. And there's some things you can do there too. Reduce the amount of space you heat. Block off the front if you're sleeping in the back. Use snow as an insulation outside. Yes, that will keep you from being found, but you can always put flags or bright things up outside. And you don't have to cover the roof either. Circulate the air in the vehicle to keep it dry. Allow as much sunlight in as possible during daylight hours when it's cold. Reflect the heat in the vehicle. Line the roof or the windows with Mylar, for example. In warmer weather, now I just talked about this, is going to be natural to have the windows, maybe the doors open while you're sleeping. Having some type of bug netting would be nice in there, or a flexible screen material that you could keep over the windows. There are some pre-made ones I talk about later in the book that have magnets that will magnet onto the metal of the outside of the car, and the bug net can hang over the window. It's a genius idea. And this is just the reverse process from above, right? I want to use a sun shield or a mylar blanket to block the radiative heat from the outside. I want to keep the vehicle open and maximize airflow inside. Use natural materials outside to shade the vehicle if possible. Now in the cold, there's an issue of getting in and out to use the bathroom, for example. So we want to strategically plan this. Everybody in, everybody out at the same time. We want to maintain as much heat inside as possible. So that's it for the first section under Essentials. So I realize I breezed over it. I do encourage you to read this and look at it a little more in depth. Next we move on to the essential section, water. But for now, this wraps up the shelter. I hope this helped and you were able to learn something or maybe even get a couple ideas. Once again, I am tremendously proud to be able to present this material. It took a long time to put together, and I really hope it helps some people and makes a difference. Thanks a lot for watching.